FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
Welcome. It's the ORT Jet Business Show time. It's just gone 9 minutes. It's almost 10 minutes past 6. It's on the 20th of February, 2025. I can't believe it's the 20th of February, but I also can't believe it's 2025. We've got a fantastic guest with us tonight, and I'm going to be getting to that a little bit later. So welcome, GG Alcock.
Thank you.
And I'll introduce you formally just now after I do my tradition of doing a little bit of a business story. If this is the first time that you're listening, I'll give a little bit of a business story, giving some insight into business, and then we'll go on to the interview. But before we get going, it's called the ORT Jet Business Show, and ORT has been around since 2005. And the ORT Jet baby was born with a group of visionaries who decided to help small businesses. And what started small has now turned into a thriving community. It's empowering over 3,000 businesses through mentorship and training and networking. And they've walked alongside the entrepreneurs through thick and thin. And now that it's 20 years, it's time to have a birthday party. So ORT is turning 20, and anybody who has been involved with ORT, we want to hear from you. If you're an alumni, whether you've done some mentoring or we've helped you as a business, please get in touch with us so that you can celebrate with us. So if ORT Jet has been part of your journey in any way, share the story with us, and if you can contact Helene or Tracy, and the number is 011-728-7154. That's 011-728-7154. And your success is ORT's story, so let's celebrate it. So talking about ORT, yesterday the CEO of ORT, Ariella, told me that a little story that I thought was fantastic. She told me the story of the chocolate chip cookie, that it was created by accident. And it's a fascinating story in that a lady, Ruth Graves Wakefield, was making biscuits and ran out of butter and thought, what else could I use? I'm busy making these, what could I use? And she went in and used some chocolate, and she took the chocolate instead of butter, hoping that that would do the trick. And it didn't exactly do the trick, because it wasn't baking chocolate, it was normal chocolate, and it didn't melt completely. But what happened is that it was too late to change things, and she served these, and people loved them. And there is a fact here that it is America's favorite cookie, the chocolate chip, and it's over 50% of people said that that's their favorite one, and it was created by mistake. And what happened in the end is that actually Nestle bought the recipe from her. They paid her only $1, but for the rest of her life they supplied her with chocolate that she could use. So Nestle got involved with that. And so learning or creating something from a mistake is actually the way of an entrepreneur. And along those lines, 3M had a very similar situation. You know those 3M post-it notes? If you look at it, you think, wow, who thought of that you could use something that could be used over and over again? And in fact, that too was a mistake. There was a Dr. Spencer Silver who was trying to create the strongest adhesive that he could so that they could take it into space. And what happened is he created this and it didn't work. And he just left it lying around until another colleague saw it and saw that you could restick it and said, hang on a second, that's a fantastic invention. So the mistake turned into something great. And if you notice, you could only get the yellow ones for many, many years. And now all of a sudden you can get all sorts of different colors. And that's because 3M had the patent for however many years, I think it was 20 years, and only when the patent was over that other people could come into the market. But the message behind this for entrepreneurs is that you will make mistakes, but it's about learning from those mistakes. It's about adapting to those things. With the chocolate chip cookie, there was no butter. What else could I use? Tried it with chocolate. It actually didn't work the way that she wanted to, but in the long run, it worked even better. So from a business point of view, it's very, very important as an entrepreneur to keep trying different things. And when things don't work, look at it and say, what's the lesson? And it might not have gone the route that I wanted it to go, but is the route that it went even better than what I thought it would be? So share with us your stories. If you have any other stories like that, we'd love to hear it. So I'm going to introduce GG to you, and GG will unpack his expertise of the township economy. It's a place where most of us drive past, but very few of us look in. And hopefully today it'll be a window into this hidden world. GG has written 3 books. The first book is titled Third World Child, Born White, Zulu Bred. The other 2 are titled Kasinomics and Kasinomic Revolution. Kasi comes from the name Lokasi, location, and it's the economics of the location. So we're going to be talking about what that economy is like. And GG knows all about this because he grew up in one of the poorest regions in South Africa in a location. And it's not far from a place where I know that you've all heard of. And that place is famous for its fire pool. Do you remember the story of the fire pool? So where he grew up is very close to that and close to Nkandla. GG, you had insight into the economy of locations, and you had contacts with the locations, and you helped introduce businesses into that type of economy. And you became what I'd call a Lokasi consultant of how do you sell into that. And I believe you're still doing that, and it's many, many, many years later. But you told me earlier that we are not keeping the economy afloat. We're not keeping that informal sector afloat. In fact, maybe they're keeping us afloat because they're such a thriving economy. And it's a mirror to how we are. So I've got a 3-part question that I'm going to ask you. Are you still consulting to these companies? And once a company is in there, what else can you teach them? That's the first question. Explain what you mean by the informal sector is a mirror to the formal sector. And then the third one is, I've heard some of your stories, but please share those stories with us that are specific to the township entrepreneurs. So GG, welcome to the show. I know I've put a lot onto you, but I want you to tell us all about this, but after the ad break.
Chai FM, your station of choice since 2008.
Welcome back. I'm David Zeidel. This is the ORT Jet Business Show. We're about to talk to GG Alcock, who is the Lokasi consultant. I'm not sure if you've been called that before, but I'm going to name you the Lokasi consultant. And you've got insight into the location from a business aspect that most of us and most businesses don't. And could you please share with us some of those stories of some of those entrepreneurs from the location?
Great, thank you, David. So I think the biggest problem, and the reason I called my book Kasinomics, is that the perception about informal economy or township is that it's about unstructured, unsophisticated, small-scale subsistence, survivalist businesses. And the reality is actually that space is far more dynamic from a business sector. In fact, we often just think of it as just spaza shops or hawkers. And the reality is, just if we look at the spaza sector is worth about 190 billion rand a year across about 100,000 supermarket style shops, and it's really transformed to where you have what I call a spazarette, more supermarket type outlets. And it's so developed that people like ShopRite, for instance, with their USave business, have found it's better to supply them than to compete with them. They've launched ShopRite Cash and Carry, a wholesale business to supply the spazas. But then over and above that, we have a fast food sector. We have what I call Kasi course, which is a range of different foods. Generally, not just cheaper foods, but kind of what I call soul food. It's the food that people prefer, and often it's more expensive than, say, a McDonald's or KFC. And it's everything from what's called chicken dust to something called a gorda and many others. And that's a 90 billion rand a year sector across about 50,000 outlets.
Yeah. So I've heard of the chicken dust, and it's because they're brying on the side of the road and the dust comes and it joins it.
Well, there's two stories. The one is that exactly that is that they're brying on a charcoal drum on the side of the road, and the dust comes up and lands on the chicken. I've tasted it; it's absolutely delicious. And the real story is actually that people take the spices and they dust them, in essence, onto the chicken. And so it's really chicken that's been dusted with spice.
And what was the other one? The gorda. You said.
So the gorda. I built a business for Parmalat. Cheese slices, individually wrapped cheese slices going into the gorda. Now, the gorda from the word is a quarter loaf of bread, hence the word gorda, with slap chips, bologna, achar, and so on. And we introduced cheese slices into Vetkoek as well as gordas. And today, Parmalat sells in excess of 3 billion rand a year in cheese slices going into the market that didn't exist before. So just kind of gives you a sense of scale. But over and above that, there's a huge market in rental, in what we call amaroom or backroom rental. That's 20 billion rand a year is earned by South African households in backroom rental.
20 billion rand.
20 billion, quite conservatively. And in fact, there's a shortage of it. It's one of the fastest growing sectors that a number of businesses are now invested into financing this for households, where they build double-story, sometimes even bigger units, and these are 3x3 or 6x3 meter rooms, quite well furnished, and renting out a 3x3 for about 3,000 rand, a 6x3 up to 5,000 rand per room. So that's a huge sector. Then we have.
To interrupt, but can they get mortgage bonds? Being in the informal sector, how do they finance the building of these rooms?
So there's a combination. In many cases, they don't have a title deed, so they struggle to get formal finance. So a lot of it is financed through what people call a society, which are savings stokvels. They also, through things like just savings. A lot of it is paid through lay-by, where a lot of the hardwares, particularly in that space, you can pay every month until you have the materials, and then so you might pay it off over 6 months, a year, 2 years, where you lay-buying all the materials. And then there's a number of businesses. There's a business called Mastandi. And
what's it called?
A Mastandi. So it's like stands.
So if I want to start a business there, I must say just something.
Sort of. There's another business called Indlu. There's a bunch of kind of startup businesses which are entering that space. Who then, if you have a title deed, they supply you, they help you with finance, they help you with getting the plans passed and so on. And generally what they do is a combination. Many of them will take a percentage of your rent, so 80% of your rent for the first, say, 3, 4, 5 years until you've paid for it. And as you pay for it, you start getting a higher portion of the rent. Others, it's a typical kind of home loan financing over 15 or 20 years and so on. So, and it's a space that has massive opportunity for both the building sector as well as the financing sector. If you could finance those, it really is a growing sector. And then you have other sectors. You have the auto sector, what I call Kasi mechanics and panel beaters. You have about 80,000 of those servicing everything from the taxi sector, which just the taxi sector is 50 billion rand a year across 250,000 taxis. And then you have the beauty sector, hair salons. That's a 10 billion rand a year sector across about 60,000.
So can I ask you, all of these sectors, and it's huge amount of money, are they not contributing to the fiscus, or are they?
Yeah. Well, let me come to that. But I think the important thing just in terms of that is if you take a mirror to the formal economy, you'll find every single one of those businesses in the formal economy represented in the informal economy. They just operate slightly differently, or in many cases, they're just invisible to the formal economy, and yet they represent massive opportunity to engage with that, like the Parmalat example and so on. I'm working at the moment with Supreme Flour, part of RCL, who's a listed business. We're working with Supreme Flour with about 4,000 township bakeries. Wow. And it's amazing how, there's one bakery in Tembisa in a shack settlement with a young lady, Pulani, and Pulani bakes 4,000, or her and her team bake 4,000 loaves of bread a day. They have about 7 little bakkies that go and deliver the bread to spaza shops and Gorda outlets and so on. She employs 15 staff, and literally in this kind of little township bakery. And there's many like that. So
and how does someone like that handle the lack of electricity, maybe, or lack of water?
So that's one of the big issues. Is generally has been electricity up until now. The one in north of Pretoria in Garangua, the guy was in one part of the township, and then he realized that the part of the township that's close to Roslyn, where the motor vehicle factories are, doesn't get as much load shedding. So he closed his business on the one side of the township and moved right onto the edge of Roslyn and bought a little 4-room house there and turned it into a bakery. But it's one of the issues they have to deal with, and you find they're incredibly resilient. They will get generators and stuff like that, but generally a generator struggles to run one of these commercial ovens, but then in some cases, the guys know that there's no load shedding at 3 a.m, so then they'll start baking at 3 a.m. instead of 5 a.m, and so on. So
wow! So this example of what you're talking about, by doing it at 3 and then also moving to the other side of the township closer to Roslyn, is exactly what I was talking about with being, as an entrepreneur, finding solutions that normally wouldn't be solutions.
100%. And I think we find that in this space, they really are incredibly innovative and resilient, and survive shocks remarkably well. But I want to go back to your question about the contribution to the fiscus. So I think there's a couple of things one has to consider. In most cases, they're not VAT registered, so they pay VAT, which as per our budget speech yesterday is quite an issue. But anyway, they currently are not claiming VAT, so there's a 15% benefit.
So they're paying it because they're buying all the stuff, paying VAT, and then when they sell it, they can't claim that back.
Absolutely.
Just on that, I just want to highlight something that people might not be aware of. So the talk was we're going to go from 15% to 17%. And some people are saying, it's only a 2% difference. What does that make? It's not a 2% difference, because 2% on top of the 15 is actually a 13 and a third difference. So it's as if your prices will automatically just jump by almost 15%. And that's a huge impact, especially on people who can't claim it back, as you said.
So I think there's a big benefit of that. The second part about that is that they are buying things like flour in the case of the bakeries. In the case of the hair salons, they're buying hair extensions and relaxers and stuff from companies like Unilever and Umca and people like that. So there's a massive demand being created from formal businesses which are paying tax and which are contributing to our economic growth. And without them, the rest of our economy is fairly flatlining. But if we can look at companies like the Vugele Property Fund, we could look at Dipua, we could look at Exemplar. These are listed companies that are involved very actively in the shopping center space. And like Vugele's recent figures showed that their township shopping centers grew at about 14%. their rural shopping centres about 7%, and their urban shopping centres at about 4%. So
Wow.
township shopping centres 3 times higher growth. And how is that possible if you didn't have this informal sector that's actually driving and creating incomes where people are then going and shopping and stocking up at shopping centres? So, there's a real knock-on effect of the demand that's created by these businesses in these kind of spaces. So I think that the economic impact on the formal economy of this so-called informal economy is far greater than we realize. I mean, the formal economy is fairly flat. So we're seeing ShopRite, Capitec, PEP, many of the businesses that are involved in that space are actually doing very well. And it represents, from a business perspective, a real kind of new frontier of opportunity, because if you're supplying that space, there's another company, PG Bison. PG Bison provides high-end kitchen surfaces and so on. More than, I think, about 60% of their business now goes into the township. And that's another listed business or part of a listed business. So I think that there's such big opportunities in this kind of space to supply, to service, to partner, and so on with this kind of sector. And in the absence of massive growth in the formal economy, we need to kind of say, well, where are the growth economies? And that's in that space.
Wow, that's incredible. I drive down Louis Botha sometimes, and I never turn right if I'm going, because you don't go there. We've always been told you don't go there. Is that true, that one shouldn't go there? Is it, you often have, as you grow up, you have a fear of all sorts of things that turn out at the end that they were baseless. Is this another baseless fear, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Look, I think that, any township, whether it's Alexandra, Soweto, Khayelitsha in the Western Cape, Soshanguve north of Pretoria, Mdantsane in the Eastern Cape, Umlazi and KZN, all of them are actually cities. And so, of course, you have a part of that which is like a low-income, higher-risk area. And then you have like these really amazing, suburbs within that township that are make Bryanston look fairly cheap and tatty. And even in Khayelitsha, you fly into Cape Town, you fly over Khayelitsha, and people look down and go like, wow, look at all those shacks. Once you clear the perimeter of Khayelitsha, you go into these incredibly beautiful homes. There's a place called Ace, which is a club in Khayelitsha. It's a double story. I mean, it's an incredible place. In Khayelitsha, and so I think that we our lack of knowledge of those spaces makes us fear them, and yet when we read things in the media, we read the negative, and it's a tragedy that we extrapolate on negative stories. We hear that people live in the shacks, and yet only 8% of households in South Africa today live in informal dwellings, and almost 90% of households live in very nice formal dwellings. And yet we read about the 8%, So when you drive into for instance, Alex, there's certain parts that are rows of shacks and really not great. A lot of those are immigrant people, like Zimbabweans, Malawians moving in, and you go to the West Bank, which is kind of where the Gautrain station is, and drive around there, and it's beautiful, and there's some lovely restaurants, and there's a restaurant there called Kasi that does Kasi Mexican food, which is it's Mexican food done in the township kind of style. So you can get a nacho corta, So I think it's very important for us to put it in perspective. As like any place, go to New York. There's parts of New York you don't want to go, and there's other parts that are amazing, and the townships are the same.
So if you just tuned in and you're wondering who this is and what we're talking about, I'm talking to GG Alcock. He's the author of 3 books on township doing the economics of the township, and also a Lokasi consultant, or consulting on the different things in the townships. So talking about these restaurants, I've heard from a few people about a place in Soweto called Conquer. And apparently this is the place you go there and you bottle of water costs 80 Rand, and you want to show off by having as many even bottles of water or more on your tables. Is that, are we going through the aspect of people trying to show their wealth now and showing off what they have and spending where maybe they just over the top?
Yeah. So Conca's there, and it is really one of those places that people go to show off, and generally those people aren't township people. They're coming from outside the township. But the reality is the vast proportion of people are middle-class, conservative people, and there are some really amazing places in the township. There's a place called Social Link. There's another place called Melai's. Melai's a friend of mine. He's got Melai's Lounge in Pimville and Soweto. And if you go to Melai's, it's no different from going to, a restaurant, a Mug and Bean, I guess, or a Baron. Actually, Baron's probably closer to the example. And he serves some very expensive alcohol all the way to normal stuff. And when you go there, you find, couples, and it's not ostentatious and over the top. It's where people go and watch. In fact, I visited him the other day on a Monday, and there'd been a big rugby game the night before on Sunday, and he was exhausted. He said, we sat here after the rugby, everyone was celebrating because the Springboks won. And he was said everyone was here until 2 a.m. And I kind of laughed, because how many people imagine that people in Soweto are sitting until 2 a.m. after the rugby, and these fanatical supporters. And so that's the real nature of it, is that you have, of course, you've got these ostentatious places, but the majority of places are just normal, middle-class people, and some of them are older people. Others you go and it's only youngsters, and the older people ones won't let the youngsters in, and they'll have rules like no denim or tackies and stuff like that. But so you have these, and it's really to a large extent, townships have transformed to be suburbs. Right. No different from the suburbs in Johannesburg, where you'll have the mix from Hillbrow on one level and Bryanston and Sandton on the other. If you go to Protea in Soweto, Protea, it's just lovely. In the shopping centres, you know, Protea Glen or Protea Gardens shopping centres, they like in Maponya Mall or Jabulani Mall, they'll give certainly places like Northgate and so on a run for their money. So, and I think the misconception is still based on there's so many negative stories told, and then we group this all together. We go like, townships, it's about violence, or it's about show off, or it's about crime or whatever. And the reality is the vast proportion of people are living their lives. They've got little gardens that they're proud of. They've invested in their homes. There's a huge amount of investment, not only in renovating and extending the old little four-room homes, but a lot of money spent on inside the home, renovating kitchens and decor and stuff. One of my clients is, for instance, Pep, and Pep has Pep Home. And they do very, very well in this kind of space of home decor in these places.
So the money's being spent to upgrade in the township, but it's been spent in companies that are outside the township, like PEP, for instance. If I can ask you, so a perception that we have, and I know you speak about in your book with the ladies with the vet cook.
Yeah.
So you see a lady selling vet cook on the side of the road, and you say, shame, poor lady, she must probably making 1,000 Rand a month, and how does she live off that? And in your book you say that's not reality, that's not the truth.
Yeah.
Can you fill us in with that story?
So look, of course there's a few people who are really struggling and making small amounts of money, but a large proportion of them, the majority of them, actually do very well. And there's an example of a lady called Miriam in Soweto, in Baragwanath taxi rank. And Miriam wakes up at 3 a.m. By about 3:30, 4 o'clock, she's starting to make amagwinya or vet cook. And she sells about 1,500 vet cook every morning, and for R1.50 each. And she makes a profit of between 500 to 800 Rand a day profit on those vet cook. Then at about 10 o'clock, she starts doing deep-fried horse mackerel, garapao they call it, and she can do 200 to 300 of those, selling them for 20 to 30 rand each a day, and she can make again, between 400 and upwards in terms of profit. So she actually can make almost 1,000 rand profit a day. She's building a double-story house in Meadowlands in Soweto. She's just bought herself a little NP200 van. She's very proud of. She paid cash for. I said to her when I first met her, I said, "How did you start here?" She said, "I was a geography and a maths teacher at a high school in Soweto." And she said, I decided I want to go into business. So she said, I did a course with a guy called Raymond Ackerman. She said, have you heard of him? I said, yes, I have heard of him. She said, I did a course with him. And after that, I left the school and I started doing this job. And kind of, and those are actually the majority of people.
Wow. So I want to unpack that story a little bit more. If you've just tuned in, I'm speaking to GG Alcock, who is talking about the informal sector, and we're going to pick up the story after the break.
Chai FM, your station of choice since 2008.
So welcome back. I'm David Zeidel. This is the ORT Jet Business Show. I'm talking to GG Alcock, who's an expert on business in the locations and the informal sector. And he's busy telling us the story of Miriam, who's selling her fed cook. And I'm sure there are lots of Miriams like that. What does somebody like that earn in a month? And then maybe if you've got a couple of other stories of people similar to that. And are they living a good life, or is it really a struggle?
So there are the people who's struggling. I think they're not the majority. In fact, they're definitely not the majority. And you just see that in terms of things like I mentioned earlier, the vast proportion of people living in a formal home that they've upgraded themselves. We also see it in the spend that's being spent in the formal sector from shopping centres and so on. But I'll give you an example. There's a young lady, Balisa. Balisa has a hair salon, and how it works in the township is you don't employ staff to work in your hair salon. You rent out styling stations, a bit like an Uber or Airbnb model.
Wow. And
she has 10 people who rent out from her. She started doing hair when she was 16, when she was still at school. And she was always entrepreneurial. Her mother used to make fed cook, and then in the morning before she went to school, she'd take a bucket with fed cook and go house by house selling fed cook to the in the street. And then she started doing hair, and she now has this little hair salon, and she has 10 people that rent from her these styling stations. And she's also got a courier business that operates from her salon. And when I was chatting to her, she was holding a little iPhone 14 Max at the time, was the top phone. And I said to her, is that on a contract? And you pay? She said, no, she paid cash for it. She paid 24,000 Rand for it.
Wow.
It gives you an idea. And she's been running this business. She was 20, she's probably now 21. And there's many others. There's a lady called Mbali. Mbali has a chicken dust outlet. We mentioned chicken dust just now. And she has 7 little outlets. And Mbali buys and sells 50 to 61 kg chicken flatties a day. She buys them for 45 Rand and she sells them for 110 Rand with pap or rice and 2 salads. And I did an interview with her with Alec Hogg from Biz News, and she said, Alec, at the end of the month, she says, I belong to 3 societies, 3 savings stokvels. She said, one I put 15,000 Rand a month in, one I put 10,000, one I put 5,000, and then if I've got money left over, which I often do, she says, then I'm a mashonisa, which is a loan shark. So she also runs a little loan business. And these are the remarkable stories. And there's so many people. I could go on all day about these people who are, and Bali was the cleaner at the Woolworths at Cedar Square. And she decided one month, She kept on. When she got off the taxi in Noor Street in town, she used to pass someone selling chicken dust, and she said, I could do that. And she went off and she took her last salary on the last month that she worked at Woolworths, and she went home. She bought 2 chickens. She went and stood on the street corner and she sold the 2 chickens. And once she sold them, she went and used the money to buy 2 more chickens, and so on and so forth. And now she's doing, sometimes at month end, she can sell 1,000 chicken a week.
Wow.
And there's so many of these people who building these businesses. The backroom rental sector I mentioned. There's a young lady in Dabiseng in Protea, and she decided that she wanted to rent out back rooms, and behind her house she built 11 back rooms. She rents them for about 3,000 Rand each. Using that money, she went down the road and she bought another house, which she demolished, and she built 14 rooms. And those 14 rooms, she put 2 beds in, fully furnished. She rents them out for student accommodation at 9,000 Rand a room.
I've been trying to do the maths in my head, but it's the numbers are big.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have these remarkable entrepreneurs out there who've built their businesses with no real form of financing, and that also represents a massive opportunity. Is how can we finance these kind of businesses? A bakery business. There's a lady who runs called Wendy, who's got a business called Tulip. Tulip is her one daughter's name is Tuli, and her other daughter's name is Priscilla. So she called her business Tulip, and she needed 25,000 Rand to start the bakery. And she went to all her family members and she borrowed, she said 2,000 Rand here, 500 Rand there. She got all of her family to lend her the money, and then she went and bought this commercial bakery oven. And she does between 800 and 1,200 loaves of bread a day now, and and does really, really well. I went to visit her, and she's got this beautiful house. I mean, you walk into her lounge, it's just lovely. And at the back of the house is the bakery. And her husband was in a construction job. And she kept on saying to him, come join me in the bakery. And he was laughing. He was saying to me, I told her baking is a woman's job. Now guess who's the main baker? He's the main baker. And he wakes up at 3:30 to get the ovens going in the morning.
So she literally brings in the daily bread. So
exactly, yeah.
So all these stories and all these people that you've met, and it's in a sector where you wouldn't think that people would thrive, and they're thriving.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, or can you put your finger on what makes an entrepreneur? What made that woman take her last check from Woolies and say, I can do that and do it? Because a lot of people say, I can do it, but they don't.
Yeah.
Could you maybe share, and maybe it's unfair me asking you this even, so you don't have to answer it, but what makes an entrepreneur like that? Is there something you've seen with people who are entrepreneurial, and what makes people successful? So
quite an interesting thing. I mean, I don't really have the full answer, but one of the things that you find is that what I start doing now is I ask them, did your mother or did your father or did your grandmother have a little business? And almost always they were like the one I mentioned with Balisa. She'd wake up in the morning and sell vet cook and so on. And so many of them grew up where they had a parent who was doing this work in this kind of space out of necessity. They had no choice. And they got that little bug. The second part about it is which is very interesting, is that the majority of the very successful ones actually came out of a formal business. Another baker is a guy called Sam, who was the librarian at UNISA. And he decided that he wanted to start a bakery, and he started this bakery using his pension. He took an early pension from UNISA and now runs a successful thing. And, I mentioned, most of these people, like an Mbali, have come from some sort of formal business and just decided they've used the skills that they learned in a formal job, and they've applied them in terms of discipline and financial management and these kind of things, applied it. But why they've done it? Primarily, they've all kind of felt that they could do better. So some of them have run the business on the side while they were in that business, and then started making more money on a weekend than they were making in a month in their formal job. And so that's the kind of thing, has been this thing of I want to do it for myself and I can do better on my own.
Wow. And I want to unpack that a bit more, but we have to go for an ad break.
High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
Welcome back to the ORT Jet Business Show. I'm David Zeidel. I'm talking to GG Alcock. We started off talking about the informal sector, but we're moving further on to what makes an entrepreneur. And some of the things you said is, if your parents were entrepreneurial, maybe you pick it up from them. Also, a lot of them, it's out of necessity. And then the third thing that you said was, you need some kind of base. So they learned some of the skills from a formal job, and they now are applying it to their own thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that and we see that in the beginning, when the business is relatively small, and most people are familiar with this, it's quite easy to be successful. And then as it grows, it's about cash flow. Suddenly you employ staff, and staff is the biggest issue. Everyone complains. If you think people in the formal sector complain about staff, in the informal sector, they complain even more. It's about how do you manage staff, and then how do you finance things? How do you finance a bakkie to deliver your bread from the bakery and stuff like that? And the people who've had some sort of formal training or formal experience generally are more successful when the business starts scaling. And I talk a lot about, the real opportunity for growing our economy is not about startups. We get a lot about let's create more businesses. It's not about startups, because starting a business is really difficult, and these guys give proof of that. But it's actually about scale-ups. If we can help these multitude of smaller businesses grow, that's actually where the opportunity is. And that's not only true to the informal sector. The formal sector is the same, and worldwide we're seeing this kind of move towards saying scale up is actually more important than startup, because moving literally out of the garage into your next kind of thing is the thing that really matters. Because starting up a business, there's many of them, but many businesses don't survive past a certain space, and we see this in this informal space. And I think that the real opportunity is, how do you help businesses scale up through finance, through training, through giving them systems that they can help run their business, and many other things.
Wow. So it's interesting. I've been involved in businesses. The first time I've heard that, of the focus on the scale up and not the startup. I have focused on the scale up, but unfortunately it's in the morning when I stand on the scale, it keeps going up.
Yeah.
But that's not what you mean, obviously. But so it's about having a business and growing that business, and that's where growth comes from, and that's how we grow the whole economy, basically.
Yeah, so there's a misconception that and I've heard this before. It's such a pity, and I heard it from the one of our ministers of small business development in the government, who said we need more entrepreneurs in the township, and I'm like, rubbish. There are thousands, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs in the township who are starting these little businesses. We have no shortage of entrepreneurial spirit in our country and in our townships and stuff like that. We have no shortage of resilience and passion and initiative and stuff like that. What we have a shortage of is how we take these businesses from being a small business to being a large business, or having many branches, or and having staff and being able to survive shocks and so on and so forth. Is that the next level is what we should be investing in. And it also represents the opportunity, as I said. I mean, I'm working with a little startup business that lends money to township businesses to spend on ovens or whatever it might be. And they've just developed innovative ways of understanding how big this business is. So instead of having a balance sheet and a financial statement, they can, for instance, go and look at a wholesaler and say, you've got an account at the wholesaler, how many bags of flour do you buy every month? And that gives you a sense of their spend as opposed to just their turnover. And there's other ways that we can use to understand, and work out the feasibility to lend their money and so on. So I think that the real opportunity in many ways is on the one side scaling, but also how can we help these businesses scale? I'm working, as I said, with Supreme Flour on a project, a loyalty project, rewards project with Township bakeries. And what we see is by rewarding them for purchasing Supreme Flour, they invest that into their bakery. And, so they get a mixer or they get another oven, and suddenly they're buying more flour. So, you suddenly have this reciprocal benefit where you're not only helping the business grow, but the business in the same process is then helping your business grow by sourcing more of that product.
Wow, and I love the point of you saying, if you want to know if a business is successful, just look at how much they're spending. Because if they're not making money, they wouldn't be buying, as you said, more and more flour.
Absolutely.
That's even a better measure than just their turnover, because the turnover might not turn into profit. But if they're buying more stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they'll normally have an account at a wholesaler. So Tulip, I mentioned, her husband gets from a local wholesaler every fifth day. He spends 25,000 Rand on flour, just on flour. Wow. And he spends 15,000 Rand a month on pay-as-you-go electricity. Because they don't have, mains electricity. It's all pay-as-you-go. And so you can look at his account, how much he's spent on his pay-as-you-go. You can see how much he spent on the wholesaler. And you can get a very good idea of the scale of that business.
Wow. And I think that's a nice word we're going to end it off, because I think that's the message at the end, the scale of the business and scaling it up. And it's interesting that we look at businesses here and we say, well, how can you grow your business? But even in the informal sector, it's the same thing.
Correct.
And there are lots of entrepreneurs and there are lots of people who can start things, but it's about how do you grow that?
Correct.
And I think that's a great message for tonight's show. So thank you very much for being on the show. I've been talking to, if you've just missed it, go and listen to the podcast. I've been talking to GG Alcock, who's the Kasi, what did I call it? The Kasi consultant. I'm David Zeidel, and this has been the ORT Jet Business Show.